I never thought I'd see this day, and honestly, many of us didn't. It feels like a lifetime ago, and when you really stop to think about it, the world, and we, were in such a different place when we last had the chance to play a new Stalker game. Call of Pripyat was released back in 2009, and while many of us, myself included, never truly left the zone thanks to the thriving modding community, it's still amazing to witness a new chapter in the franchise finally unfold. It's hard to deny that Stalker is no longer a niche game. It has evolved, and with that comes inevitable change. This shift can be jarring, especially for veterans. When a cult classic moves from being a cult hit with a tight-knit community to a more mainstream title, certain things inevitably change. Many games have tried or succeeded in making this transition, aiming to grow larger, more competitive, or even challenge bigger, established franchises. But those shifts don't always lead to better games. It's no surprise that there are plenty of loud voices out there claiming that Stalker is no longer Stalker, that the games have changed, that Stalker 2 isn't a true sequel. We'll take a closer look at all that in this video. Since this is a fairly recent release, I'll keep spoilers to a minimum in this general section, and then I'll spoil the whole game with endings, but there will be a disclaimer for all of you mystery enthusiasts. That being said, there's a lot I need to discuss, not only about Stalker 2, but also about the franchise as a whole and the mods that have kept it alive. This review may seem slightly off balance as I touch on general Stalker related topics, but let's start with the basics. Where does Stalker 2 stand right now, and what are the areas that need improvement? I'll break them down by their severity. First off, it's quite clear that the AI system isn't functioning properly at the moment. Right now, it feels more like a spawner that operates within a limited bubble around you. In its current state, even after a few patches, it's also quite immersion breaking. Enemies can, and often will, spawn right in front of you. I have encountered several instances where I cleared out a compound, started looting, and then enemies would spawn in an adjacent room or just around a corner, leading to awkward, immersion-shattering encounters. The developers have acknowledged that it's not working as intended right now, and are reportedly working on a fix. In my opinion, the most significant misstep GSC made with the release of Stalker 2 is the broken A-Life system. It's a core feature that simply must function correctly. Some mods have already attempted to address this issue with makeshift solutions, but a proper patch from GSC is definitely needed to fix this. Another area where the game falls short is its handling of crucial information. By this, I mean the game does a poor job of communicating important details to the player. For example, when you're hungry, an icon appears, but it doesn't convey how hungry you actually are. If I eat a food item, how much do I need to consume to feel sated? After drinking an energy drink, my stamina recovers, but does it provide a passive boost as well? According to the community, it does. But the game doesn't indicate this clearly. Another frustrating example is reputation with factions. How does it work? Well, the only indication you get is the color of the NPCs. Green for good, white for neutral, red for bad. But what does increased reputation actually do? You can vaguely notice that prices drop, but there's no real explanation or feedback from the game to explain these systems clearly. The game balance is all over the place. I played on the highest difficulty, and while it retains the old Master difficulty feel, where headshots generally result in instant kills, mutants are a different story entirely. It's not uncommon to go through entire magazines just to bring down a single mutant. Additionally, the game has a trigger system that spawns mutants in certain situations. For example, touch a stash and suddenly a bloodsucker appears. While this wouldn't be as bad if there were any real incentive to hunt mutants, that's not the case. There are no mutant parts to collect, and fighting mutants outside of missions feels pointless. This is another area where we have been spoiled by mod packs, since S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Sky and Call of Pripyat also didn't have mutant parts, if I remember correctly, which was the main incentive to engage with them. To summarize, several systems are left out, systems which could have added depth to the gameplay. For example, mutant parts as loot, cooking mutants, a clearer way to influence the reputation system, and better rewards for having high reputation with a certain faction. Continuing with the issue of poor information delivery, it's sometimes hard to distinguish factions, especially in the field, even for seasoned players. When you loot enemies, there's no clear indication of which faction you're facing. The classic Stalker dilemma of is it a bandit or a loner is back, a problem we know too well from mod packs. However, in Stalker 2, the issue feels less important for now, mainly because the faction relation system is so bare bones and hostile squads can spawn right on top of you. Looking at uniforms can help a little, but the addition of new factions only makes it harder to know who you're up against. There are several systems in place, but once again, there's no clear indication for the player. For example, the community discovered a ranking system for Stalkers, but there's no leaderboard to check, and when you loot a Stalker, you still don't see their faction or rank. I'm also not a fan of the fact that all Stalker dialogue is now fully voiced. While this might be a nice touch for newer players who are not familiar with the older games, or for those accustomed to other open world titles, I find myself disapproving of this change. Don't get me wrong, I have nothing against voice dialogue in general, but it inherently leads to less dialogue overall. This is evident in how dialogue is handled in Stalker 2. Random Stalkers, for example, now have less to say than ever before, and they no longer offer missions. I'm sure mods will eventually fix this by adding more non-voice dialogue to NPCs, but for now it feels like a step backwards. There are also technical issues, some of which are more severe than others. For example, main story missions can bug out, and as I write this, progressing through the story feels a bit risky, as you might softlock your progress. And that's really my main complaint with Stalker 2 at the moment. In a way, we're back to the classic Stalker 1.0 experience. It's full of the same issues we've come to expect: broken progressions, NPCs blocking doors, locked doors that shouldn't be locked, triggers failing to trigger, and moments where you have to use the console to work around things, like enemies spawning in inaccessible areas. To top it all off, there are missions where certain enemies need to be killed to progress, creating even more frustration when these spawn in areas that are normally inaccessible. Before diving deeper into this review, I'd like to make some general observations about things I've noticed so far. It seems that GSC made the right call by approaching the initial release with a triage approach. They prioritized what they believed was most important and focused their efforts, though this theory kinda starts to falter when I look at the state of A-Life, but that's another topic. So there are several elements that clearly show inspiration from mod packs: item animations, the animation for taking out your bag, high repair prices, and the expanded zone, which really lends itself to the free roam concept. I think most of GSC's effort went into the actual map, which I'm happy to say turned out amazing. They also focused on things that are harder for the modding community to address. For example, they could have implemented items like night vision devices or binoculars, but these are things that modders can easily add, and sure enough, there are day one mods for night vision and gas mask overlays. However, expanding the map and adding new areas is something much harder for the community to do, so I appreciate that they put time into this. I could be wrong on all of this, of course, but this is what it looks like to me. The map is probably the highlight of the game. The zone is now seamless, there are no loading screens between areas, some regions have been moved, expanded or merged, and while this may feel unfamiliar compared to the mods we've been playing for years, the new map better resembles the real-world area surrounding the power plant. There's a lot to see and even more to explore. While the base game might feel a little bit empty in places, I can't help but think about all the potential additions the modding community will bring. With that said, there seems to be a misconception among newer Stalker players about the desolation in certain areas. For me, this perfectly aligns with the setting. Abandoned structures are a core part of the zone, and if there's nothing to find or see in an area, in RPG terms, that doesn't make it useless. It still holds meaning. As for the story, I'll keep it brief and spoiler-free for now. This time you play as Skiff, an ex-military character who enters the zone after an artifact burns down his home. The story progression and overall flow through the zone feel reminiscent of the older Stalker titles. After the intro, you find yourself in the Lesser Zone, a new area that serves as a sort of tutorial. This rather large area will take hours to explore, depending on how much you venture off the beaten path. Once you finish the first local part of the story, the zone opens up and you're free to explore at your own pace. I'm glad to see that immersion seems to be a key focus of GSC's world building. The world is massive, and while there is fast travel, it's handled in a way that doesn't break immersion. If you want to fast travel, you'll need to find a guide and pay to be moved around the map. This is a clever solution that keeps you grounded in the game world. It costs resources, but still allows for fast travel when necessary. On the other hand, the decision to have player stashes that travel with you is more convenient and realistic. If you leave something in a chest in one part of the zone, it will be there in another area. While this system might be fine for most players, I suspect it will be one of the first things stripped away in hardcore mods once they start emerging. The main story is classic Stalker. It's not the primary focus of the game and can be buggy and confusing at times. However, it's clear that GSC couldn't resist leaning into trends that have become more popular since Call of Pripyat. A lot of effort was put into delivering a more cinematic experience, especially for main missions. There are numerous cutscenes, heavy drama, dialogue and more. While previous Stalker games had moments where the story pushed you onto a more linear path, particularly towards the end game, Stalker 2 feels much more restrictive at times. There are entire sections where you're tasked with reaching a base, and after completing that objective you're locked into a 2-hour, exposition-heavy, on-rails sequence with no access to stashes or traders. This was particularly frustrating after another lengthy quest, which led me to believe I'd finally get a break to restock and refit. Instead, I found myself stuck in an over-encumbered shootout cycle, which really hindered the experience. The older games had similar on-rails moments, but they were more contained, and the smaller scope of those titles didn't make them feel as frustrating as they do here in Stalker 2. Let me be clear though, this isn't a technical issue. It's a design choice that I personally don't agree with. If I wanted that kind of linear, cinematic gameplay, I would play a game designed for that kind of progression. Stalker has always been about the freedom of exploration and survival in the unique setting of the zone. And that's where its true strength lies. This focus on cinematic storytelling and on-rails progression feels like it detracts from what made the series stand out in the first place. A lot of time and effort, especially development time, was spent on crafting this cinematic experience that is, in my opinion, not as important for Stalker. My opinion on the matter is that this time could have been used to iron out bugs and the other issues the game has. Although I have to point out, by the time I'm writing this part of the review, there already have been 3 patches released and I'm quite happy with the support the game has been getting. The ideal case scenario would have been that the game simply released a year later, but I'm pretty sure the massive backlash from the community would have been too much for GSC, so they decided to pull the trigger. However, I have to give credit where it's due. A lot of emphasis has been placed on player choices in this one. There are several possible endings, and they mostly align with the factions you side with. There are also some more personal solutions and decisions to be made. More on that later. But the question to ask here is, was this focus on choices detrimental to the overall free play aspect of the game, if you can call it that? Progressing through the story significantly changes the zone, serving the narrative well, but it could also be seen as a double-edged sword. Additionally, GSC is back with their classic approach of leaving the story progression somewhat strange, unclear, and confusing. If this evokes that familiar feeling in longtime Stalker fans, how will the story be received by newcomers who are experiencing the franchise for the first time through Stalker 2? The graphics are truly outstanding though. While my 360 GPU did struggle a bit, particularly in Pripyat, I was still able to play the game on ultra settings. Many players have reported performance issues, but for me, they were relatively minor. Despite not having a top tier PC, the game still runs smoothly enough to enjoy the experience without any major hiccups. The visual design is a clear step up for GSC, with improvements in nearly every aspect of the game. The environments, buildings, mutants, and weapon animations all show noticeable increase in quality compared to other games, not to speak of the previous entries. That is not a fair comparison anyway. Better effects, anomalies, and emissions are all meticulously crafted, contributing to the iconic Stalker atmosphere. There's really little I could critique in terms of visuals. The team has even managed to eliminate the plastic-like lightning on the environment that can sometimes plague Unreal Engine games. Slav magic indeed. It's been a real treat to explore the zone in this new iteration, especially seeing familiar characters and locations with such a detailed graphical overhaul. A lot has changed, but much of the essence remains the same, preserving the core feel of Stalker. The love for detail shines through in every corner. and the graphical improvements serve to elevate the immersive atmosphere that is so central to the series. In the end, the map and its accompanying visual effects are the true highlights of the experience, amplifying the sense of place and tension that makes Stalker so unique. As with all Stalker games so far, the magic isn't necessarily in the technical aspect. The graphics themselves are not groundbreaking in a way that sets them apart from newer titles. Instead, it's how the graphics are used that define the experience. While most games focus on cutting-edge visuals, technological innovation, and sheer impressiveness, Stalker has always stood out because of its unique art style, combined with the technical ingenuity of the X-Ray engine in the past. Now, with the move to Unreal, some of the slaw magic from the old days might seem absent, but the graphics are still meticulously crafted to serve the game's atmosphere. They help transform the zone into a more immersive and believable place, recreating the haunting, eerie feeling that has always been central to Stalker's identity. One of my biggest concerns with the new Stalker was that, with all the hype around technological advancements, core atmosphere of the game might be compromised. Thankfully, that's not the case. In fact, it's been enhanced. A lot of effort has gone into diversifying the environments, while still maintaining that sense of realism that the series is known for. There's also room for some creative freedom. The Red Forest, for example, looks absolutely stunning, with its distinct color palette and overall aesthetic. Additionally, the inclusion of a new area, the Burned Forest, is a nod to the real-world location that were destroyed by fires and bulldozed, adding another layer of depth to the game world. Overall, the graphics play a crucial role in carrying the experience, and I personally prefer it this way, where the combination of excellent graphics and well-designed zones elevates the game. This is far more valuable than focusing on other features that mods will most certainly easily supplement. What issue I've encountered so far is with the character faces. It could be my age or maybe it's autism, but it feels like the game reuses a lot of faces, even for characters you encounter only briefly. It's giving me a bit of an Elex vibe, if you remember. They reused faces across different characters, often just swapping out hairstyles or facial hair to save time. It's not a huge deal honestly, but it does make the world feel a little bit less unique. As for the soundtrack, it's primarily ambient, with a few dynamic tracks that kick in during key story moments or specific fights. These tracks definitely add intensity when needed, but don't really contribute to the overall atmosphere of the zone. When you're in free play mode, the music is mostly subtle background noise that enhances the experience, although some tracks are a bit creepier and stand out more. Personally, I still prefer the old soundtrack, but that could just be nostalgia speaking, and it will probably take me some time to get used to the new music. The sound effects, however, are spot on. Classic sounds like the beeping of anomalies make a return, and the mutant noises have been tweaked here and there. It's a bit of a habit thing. Having known the sound of a bloodsucker for the past 20 years makes it hard to fully appreciate the new iteration. But honestly, there's nothing wrong with the new audio, it's just a matter of getting used to it. After about 40 hours with the base gameplay loop, I decided to start adding mods. And I'm happy to report that the mod support for Stalker 2 is already impressive, and it only seems to be growing stronger. Some of the footage you might see may include mods, so please note that some elements may differ from the vanilla game. With that being said, one of the standout features added by modders right from day one is mutant loot, which gives you a real incentive to hunt mutants. For context, since Clear Sky, mutants stopped dropping loot or parts that could be sold or even cooked and consumed, a mechanic that was partly reintroduced by modders into Stalker 2. This change alone adds a new layer of depth to the gameplay. Especially it gives you a really good reason to fight mutants and not to only run away from them. Along with that, we've seen some early A-Life fixes that, for better or worse, address issues with the spawning bubble and broken A-Life interactions. Beyond that, mods are gradually adding features we've come to expect from Stalker mod packs, things like gas mask overlays, night vision, faction patches, and more. There are even more mods that tweak difficulty, reduce loot abundance, and make healing items less effective, allowing you to tailor the experience to your liking. It's clear that even in the early days of Stalker 2 modding, there's already a solid foundation for customization. I've always loved the Stalker games, even in their vanilla forms, but for me, they've always been best viewed as open canvases, providing a framework for modders to paint their own vision of the zone. From what I can tell so far, Stalker 2 is living up to that legacy, and then some. As I've already mentioned a few times, the atmosphere in Stalker 2 is truly top-notch. It's not just that the zone is atmospheric because of its lore and vision, but there's a significant amount of detail that's been put into making it feel real. I'll just give one example that stands out. It's the way faction bases are designed. These aren't just functional areas, they've got all the infrastructure you'd expect. Bunks for the faction members, traders, kitchens, bars, everything that would be necessary for survival. It's these kind of details, often overlooked by other games because they don't serve a direct gameplay function, that really make the world feel alive. This stands in stark contrast to the "what do they eat" meme, often used to humorously highlight the lack of such world building in newer games like Skyrim and the Bethesda Fallout games. GSC has always excelled at creating environments that feel lived in, and I'd argue they, along with old Piranha Bytes and Morrowind era Bethesda, are among the masters of this craft. A truly immersive world is one that feels believable enough to pull you into its fantasy, or at least provides sensible reasons for why it's functioning the way it does. When you create a world where characters are eating, sleeping, drinking, and spending their time in ways that feel natural, you need to show the infrastructure that supports these actions. Without it, the player is subconsciously reminded that they're simply playing a game, and immersion is lost. True immersion happens when that feeling of gaminess is gone, and it comes from a combination of things: a believable world, strong characters, good writing, compelling stories, and above all, a sense of seriousness. I've always disliked games that don't take themselves or the world they're building seriously. It doesn't need to be overly serious, but if you're aiming to create an experience rather than just a game, and if you don't respect your own work enough to expect a certain level of seriousness from the player, the chances of creating a believable world diminish. In this regard, I'm happy to say, Stalker 2 has been largely successful. Now it's time to fully tackle the story. If you don't want any spoilers, please skip to this time. Also, please note I won't be backtracking too much into the basics of the zone or older games, as I presume that most people watching this, especially on this channel, are more than familiar with that. The story in Stalker 2 begins in a surprising way, I would say. Our new protagonist, Skiff, is living in a flat outside the zone. Unfortunately, his flat burns down, and in the wreckage he discovers an artifact. With his home destroyed and now effectively homeless, Skiff decides to head into the zone to investigate further. It's a rather banal reason to enter the zone compared to previous games in the series. After all, in Shadow of Chernobyl, you start as a mysterious figure barely surviving a journey from a death truck. In Clear Sky, you play as the tough mercenary Scar doing jobs in the zone. And in Call of Pripyat, you're Major Degyatev investigating a failed military mission and the crash sites of several helicopters. So, yeah, well, however, we learned that Skiff has a military background, which hints at a more complex past. The game is set in 2021, 9 years after the events of Call of Pripyat. The next scene introduces Dr. Herman, who we know from Call of Pripyat, as he and Skiff travel in a truck heading towards the zone. It seems that there has been further funding for research in the zone, which helps explain what's happening next. Herman has a scanner, a key plot device in Stalker 2, which is intended to charge the artifact Skiff found, unlocking its full potential. After several failed attempts to charge the artifact, things go wrong. Either the artifact isn't what it seems, or the scanner isn't working correctly, and as the military approach, blocking off any potential escape, Herman urges Skiff to turn back. Skiff decides to press on. During a third attempt to charge the artifact, they are confronted by Vard soldiers, the new faction in Stalker 2. Apparently, the Vard has taken control of the zone, forcing the other factions into an uneasy peace agreement. The Vard seems well funded and heavily armed. The other factions, though still present, have been forced into some sort of submission. We will explore the Vard's motives later, but they seem to share some common ground with duty, though their ideologies differ significantly. As the Vard soldiers approach, they show an interest in the scanner, seemingly aware of its importance. Luckily for Skiff, they are taken out by a sniper, and Skiff seizes the opportunity to steal the scanner and run. However, during his escape, he is ambushed by another group who take the scanner and leave him for dead. Herman implies that they were sold out by someone named Zolder. After regaining consciousness, Skiff meets Richter, who who doesn't know who Solder is but suggests Skiff heads to Zalitza in the Lesser Zone to continue his search for the scanner. From here, Skiff's main goal becomes finding the scanner, which leads him to meet various characters and factions. Eventually, Skiff is forced to choose whether to accept help from the Stalkers in Zalitza or the local Vard commander Zotov. These choices don't seem to have major consequences for the story's conclusion, but they do shape some of the narrative's smaller events. For example, Skiff will later have the choice to kill or spare Solder. If spared, Skiff will meet him again later in the game. The second major faction that's introduced is S.T.A.L.K.E.R, made up of Stalkers who helped Hetman in Call of Pripyat. Some of the original members are dead, but a new iteration of S.T.A.L.K.E.R has emerged, led by a familiar face, the protagonist from Clear Sky, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. S.T.A.L.K.E.'s goal is to protect the zone from the Vard, which positions them in a conflict that is similar to the old duty versus freedom divide, but with a few key twists. Duty and freedom are still around, but play minor roles in the main story. Skiff's search for the scanner eventually leads him to a monolith PDA, which directs him towards a significant plot point. Upon reaching the slag heap, Skiff is confronted by Colonel Korshunov, that is the leader of the Vard in the zone, and Dr. Dalin, a scientist from S.T.A.L.K.E.R, that is the Scientific Institute for Research of the Chornobyl Anomalous Area. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is another new faction in Stalker 2 formed after 2012 and working in tandem with the Vard, though the two organizations remain technically separate. The Vard serves as S.T.A.L.K.E.R's military arm, and the scanners are a S.T.A.L.K.E.R invention apparently. Korshunov and Dalin are most interested in the artifact Skiff has, which was inside the scanner, though the scanner itself is important too. The artifact's significance is still unclear, but Skiff has a choice to make. Will he reveal the information on the monolith PDA he found? This seems to be one of the major choices in the game, so if Skiff reveals the information to Korshunov and Dalin, he will get a Vard badge, which will help him cross the Vard-controlled areas of the zone. The next assignment will be to investigate the Noontiders on the Wild Island. Noontide is another new faction, and that is a faction of ex-Monolith members who broke free from the influence of the Wish-Granter and are trying to find their own path now. On the way there, Skiff will be intercepted by S.T.A.L.K.E.R, where you will meet their leader, S.T.A.L.K.E.R, the protagonist from Clear Sky. However, the paths converge to Wild Island, which you will visit in any case. If you don't show the PDA to either faction, you will find a third way into the Noontide base through the Stalker Mute. In any case, on the way to the Wild Island, Skiff meets S.T.A.L.K.E.R, who is now a believer in the concept of the Shining Zone. He seems rather erratic and a little bit crazy, although we never did get much information on his character in Clear Sky. This belief in the Shining Zone might stem from the Monolith's former influence. The Shining Zone is a vision of a peaceful world, free of the darkness and corruption associated with the zone and humanity. S.T.A.L.K.E.R's goal is to protect the zone, and he reveals that Dalin was not the true inventor of the scanners. S.T.A.L.K.E.R's obsession with the zone's purity raises questions about how much of the Monolith's brainwashing still affects him, especially since Clear Sky showed S.T.A.L.K.E.R in the process of being brainwashed by the Monolith. On Wild Island, Skiff meets Strider, the leader of the Noontiders, a faction of Monolith remnants who broke free from their control after the destruction of the Brain Scorcher. Strider was first introduced in Call of Pripyat, where Major Degyatev had a mission to help place some former Monolith members within other factions. Now, as ex-Monolith members, the Noontiders are in a difficult position. The rest of the zone knows they were once brainwashed, and although they are no longer under the Monolith's influence, the other factions continue to distrust anyone with ties to them. Skiff's primary reason for being on Wild Island is the discovery of a database containing valuable information about old Monolith technology, including the PDA he found earlier. For this purpose, he meets Professor Lodochka, who sends him on a mission to gather components necessary for unlocking this information. Skiff then travels to the waste processing plant, where he helps some Noontiders fend off a controller. However, things take a dangerous turn when he's ambushed by Hawk and other mercenaries sent by Dubny, who is also a Noontider, to eliminate any witnesses and cover up their tracks. This is also interesting, as it is unclear why the Noontiders would act this way and why they would cover up something like this. Back at Wild Island, Skiff witnesses an internal rift within the Noontiders. Faust, a new character, is at the heart of the conflict, passionately advocating for return to the old ways of the Monolith. Faust speaks of the blissful, unquestioning existence that Monolith members enjoyed under the influence of the Wish Granter. Faust argues that the ex-Monolith members should return to that life, as it offered peace and happiness, free from the burden of human emotions and the guilt of their past actions. Faust's viewpoint stands in stark contrast to Strider's, who represents the future for the Noontiders, a life beyond the Monolith's control. Strider believes that the ex-Monolith members must forge new identities, free from the manipulative grip of the sea consciousness, and move forward with a chance at redemption. The conflict between Faust and Strider symbolizes the struggle between holding on to the past and embracing a new future, with Faust clinging to the comfort of the old ways, and Strider pushing for a future in which they can rebuild their lives without the trauma of their former selves. The Noontiders themselves are torn between these two paths. The false peace of the Monolith's past and the difficult road to a new identity where they must come to terms with the guilt and loss of their previous lives. Faust's speech fuels this division, leaving the Noontiders to question whether they can truly escape their past, or if they will inevitably return to the very thing that controlled them. This internal struggle highlights the broader theme, the tension between past trauma and the possibility of redemption. Faust's name is also indicative here, drawing direct inspiration from the German folk legend and the later work by Goethe. In Goethe's story, Faust is an erudite scholar who becomes disillusioned with life and makes a pact with the devil, exchanging his soul for unlimited knowledge, worldly pleasures, and power. Faust's desperation for meaning and fulfillment mirrors the existential struggle faced by many Noontiders, particularly Faust, the character from Stalker 2, who seeks to return to the blissful ignorance of the Monolith era. In Stalker, Faust's name symbolically aligns with the desire to resurrect the Monolith's past and the totalitarian peace it offered, even if it means sacrificing his own moral compass and the freedom of those around him. Just as the original Faust is willing to pay any price for knowledge and pleasure, Faust in the Noontider faction seems willing to sacrifice any potential for true redemption or freedom in favor of clinging to the Monolith's false sense of bliss. His name underlines the dangerous sweetness of the past, especially for those trying to escape the trauma of their former lives, much like Faust's pact with the devil itself, a deal that ultimately comes at a great cost. This symbolic use of Faust's name enhances the thematic conflict between embracing the past, no matter the cost, and the difficult journey of self-redemption that Strider represents. It highlights the ongoing tension within the Noontiders, with Faust acting as a figure who would rather risk eternal damnation for the fleeting peace of Monolith's control, while Strider and others attempt to break free from those shackles, moving towards a future shaped by personal growth and acceptance of their humanity. In any case, the next stop for Skiff is Azimuth Station, a location where he can find further information on the Monolith PDAs. This station is under Vard control, but as Skiff approaches, he sees several Vard corpses. After investigating further, Skiff confronts Foma, a Noontider who appears to be working with Faust. Skiff learns that Faust is not only attempting to revive the Monolith, but is also betraying the Noontiders in the process. Skiff finds some more indications about another location, Camp Icarus, which becomes the next lead. Camp Icarus is under the control of the Vard, but strange psi emissions are affecting the area, causing unrest among the Vard soldiers. Skiff soon discovers that there is a traitor within their ranks. This leads him to Echo Station, where he encounters Sterev, a Vard soldier who confesses his allegiance to Faust. Skiff tries to give him some psi-block, but he refuses, forcing Skiff to take him down. It seems that Sterev was influenced by Faust's ideology and has defected and joined his cause. After downloading some data from Sterev's laptop, Skiff learns that the next assignment for the traitor was to locate the old Clear Sky base. This becomes Skiff's next goal. Clear Sky, the faction from Stalker Clear Sky, is now mostly forgotten, and its base is notoriously difficult to find, hidden deep in the swamps. As mentioned, the faction was destroyed after the events of Stalker Clear Sky, but there are still remnants of their existence in the zone. While searching for clues about Clear Sky's location, Skiff encounters another familiar face, Nimble, the guide who spared his life during the initial ambush at the beginning of Stalker 2. Nimble, who has traveled extensively throughout the zone, agrees to help Skiff. He provides him with the coordinates for Clear Sky's base and the instructions on how to disable the psi emitters protecting it. a measure put in place by Professor Kalancha, a former member of Clear-Sky. Eventually, Skiff tracks down the Clear-Sky base and investigates. There, he comes face to face with Faust once again, who now possesses Skiff's scanner. After a short and tense conversation, Faust disappears, knocking over the scanner and triggering an anomaly in the process. Despite the chaos, Skiff manages to recover the scanner. This encounter with Faust deepens the mystery surrounding the monolith and raises more questions about the true nature of the zone's power and the motivation of those who seek to control it. With the scanner in hand or on his back, the paths once again converge at S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Rumors among stalkers circulate that the Wish Granter has been relocated to a S.T.A.L.K.E.R facility. Strider and Scar want Skiff to investigate whether this is true, while the Ward insists on moving the scanner to the facility as soon as possible. Upon entering S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Skiff meets Dalin, who explains that S.T.A.L.K.E.R's goal is to connect the scanners to the generators, which would link them to the noosphere. While it's not possible to physically access the generators, the scanner, an alpha artifact, much like the one in the Wish Granter, would allow a remote connection, providing a breakthrough for humanity, particularly in the energy sector, and enabling a monumental leap forward in human evolution. However, first they have to run a test. Testing the device is impossible due to a breach in the lab. Skiff is sent to investigate and discovers a spatial anomaly, which he enters. This leads him directly to Dr. Herman, the true inventor of the scanner. Herman reveals that Dalin had no right to claim or use the scanner. He further explains that Dalin was involved in an experiment known as the Second Caribbean Experiment. The first Caribbean experiment, conducted in 1995, aimed to manipulate certain objects using sea fields, which led to the creation of the first alpha artifact. Dalin, now needing another artifact for his plans with the generators, tried to recreate the experiment. Unfortunately, it went horribly wrong, creating anomalies and artifacts outside the designated zone, including the artifact that caused the explosion at Skiff's home. Quite understandably, Skiff now tries to strangle Dalin because he learned that he was basically to blame for the burning down of his home. Korshunov is also present, but he watches somewhat gleefully. After calming down, Korshunov explains that the experiment failed only because of Spark's intervention. The next step is to actually test the artifact by powering the Wish Granter, which is under S.T.A.L.K.E.R's control. So Skiff is sent out to see if it actually works. When activated, the Wish Granter reveals multiple illusions, showing visions of the events from Shadow of Chernobyl. Eventually, Skiff makes a wish for it all to end. The Wish Granter sees this as a death wish and summons multiple phantoms for Skiff to fight. Skiff also hears Korshunov's voice ordering Vard troops to kill him. The Wish Granter is deactivated, and it's revealed that Skiff was fighting phantoms while unintentionally wounding Zotov, the Vard officer he met back in Zalitza, who had rushed to calm him down. Despite the chaos, it becomes clear that the experiment, in a twisted way, was a success. Dalin and Circa decide to move forward with their plan. Connecting to the noosphere could potentially solve all of humanity's problems and in the long run lead to the control and destruction of the zone. Korshunov then receives a message indicating that they are expected at another meeting. Upon entering the room, Skiff is confronted with a bruised Herman, and a woman named Agatha appears. Her role remains unclear, but she seems to be pulling the strings behind the scenes. Agatha explains that Herman was the reason Skiff was almost killed, and she offers him the ability to actually execute him or let him go. This presents yet another choice. After Skiff's decision, Agatha reveals that Strider and Noontide are trying to stop the experiment. She orders Skiff to go down and investigate, leading to another critical decision. Will Skiff side with the Vard or the Noontiders? If Skiff sides with the Vard, the mission becomes clear. Eliminate the Noontiders. During the confrontation, Strider is captured by the Vard while attempting to stop the experiment. However, at the last moment, a signal comes online, presumably from Faust, and all of the Noontiders are transformed back into Monolithians. Strider breaks free, seizes the Alpha artifact and flees. The entire area begins to disintegrate, but Skiff manages to save Dalin. If Skiff sides with the Noontiders, they fight against the Ward and attempt to halt the experiment. However, it leads to the same outcome. The signal comes online and all Noontiders, including Strider, are turned back into Monolithians. Strider takes the Alpha artifact and escapes. In both cases, Skiff recovers Dalin's flash drive containing important research results. If Skiff sides with the Vard, he gives the flash drive back to Dalin. On the Spark side, the flash drive remains with Skiff. The path forward from here differs slightly depending on which faction Skiff sides with. If Skiff sides with S.T.A.L.K.E.R and the Noontiders, then he works with Professor Ladochka, whom he met earlier. Ladochka informs them that the Noontide have reverted to Monolith and directs Skiff to the shelter, the Noontide base. Upon arriving, Skiff finds structures resembling those Monolith has built throughout the series. Here Skiff discovers the source of the signal, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R, seemingly aware of their path, contacts Skiff to discuss the situation further. If Skiff sides with the Vard, he is ordered to the chemical plant, the main Vard base. Meanwhile, Monolith has seized the Duga transmitters, prompting both factions to launch an assault to retake them. While with the Vard, Skiff attacks a checkpoint where Faust appears, or more accurately, multiple versions of Faust. The Vard soldiers' brains are fried, causing them to turn into zombies, and Skiff barely escapes with his life. It's interesting to note that if Skiff sides with S.T.A.L.K.E.R earlier, they have the mission to install an emitter that would cause this event. However, if Skiff is with the Vard, then he's unable to complete this task, suggesting that another S.T.A.L.K.E member carried this out in the timeline. Afterwards, S.T.A.L.K.E begins assaulting the Vard, who is engaged in a battle with Monolith. Meanwhile, Skiff heads on to confront Faust. In both story arcs, Faust appears as multiple phantoms, leading to a similar confrontation. The story then converges again, with both paths ultimately leading to STC Malachite, where Skiff must consult Professor Ozerski about how to deal with Faust and his new phantom abilities. After further investigation, it becomes clear that Faust's powers are reminiscent of the controller program previously run by the C Consciousness. All evidence points towards Professor Dupalov, who may have more information about the case. After finding and sharing a drink with Dupalov, he reveals that there is a suppressor in the X5 lab, which Skiff could use to confront Faust. Near the lab, Skiff meets another scientist, Sherba, who explains the controller program and its connection to the creatures designed as guards for Project X scientists. In the lab, Skiff uncovers data linking Faust to the project. It turns out Faust was a unique case. He was imprinted with controller-like abilities, but unlike the others, his abilities were paired with the cognitive skills of a functioning human. As we see with normal controllers, they appear quite mindless. Faust's intelligence allowed him to inspire others and manipulate people, making him a powerful force, especially paired with the controller-like abilities. The next scene involves another assault on the Duga, either with Vard or S.T.A.L.K.E.R. During the assault, the radar array is destroyed and Skiff confronts and kills Faust. In his final moments, Faust contacts Skiff subconsciously, showing him how the zone appears in his eyes. He even calls Skiff an envoy of the Monolith, believing that the Wish Granter is a god and that Skiff was sent as a punishment. Despite Faust's defeat, Monolith forces continue to attack across the zone. Upon Faust's death, Skiff finds a pendant on his body. Bringing it back to Malachite and plugging it in allows Skiff to communicate with the C consciousness. However, as we know, the bodies of the scientists and the tubes were destroyed by S.T.A.L.K.E.R in Shadow of Chornobyl. Surprisingly, it appears that the scientists' consciousness can persist in the noosphere, even after their physical bodies were destroyed, existing as a form of subtle matter. This pure consciousness can be tampered with, but doing so risks isolating or destroying the subtle matter, which is happening with the current S.T.A.L.K.E.R experiments. If Skiff has sided with the Vard, a new scene unfolds. Korshunov arrives and executes Professor Ozerski after discovering that Ozerski was involved in the sabotage of the checkpoint attack, which led to the brainwashing and zombification of the Vard soldiers. This scene does not occur on the S.T.A.L.K.E.R path, as Dalin is absent, replaced by S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Depending on the choices made, the opposing factions will raid the facility and Skiff must fight his way out. Eventually, both factions assign Skiff a new mission: find S.T.A.L.K.E.R. As always, this task is daunting, and previous experience suggests it will be anything but straightforward. If you remember the older games and the location of S.T.A.L.K.E.'s old hideout, you might be able to find it. This way you find additional information. Apparently, S.T.A.L.K.E.R tried to sabotage both the X11 lab and S.T.A.L.K.E.R projects before fleeing to the mainland, vowing to return and destroy Project X once and for all. As usual, we have to track down S.T.A.L.K.E.R now. We know S.T.A.L.K.E.R had its own group, consisting of Ghost, Fang, and the Doctor. Since Ghost and Fang are dead, we're left with only one lead, the Doctor. After gathering more information, we find the Doctor in the Red Forest, living under a mysterious dome where he has established a house. The Doctor has been mostly preoccupied with saving lives, whether Stalker, mutant, or even Monolithian. On the way there, Skiff discovered a group of mercenaries with only one wounded survivor. He informs Skiff that they had a hit on the Doctor, but the Doctor struck first and killed all of them. However, Upon reaching the doctor, we find a severely wounded Strider, suggesting that it was actually Strider who took down the mercenaries. The doctor wishes to save Strider, and since he's an active monolithian, he sends Skiff to retrieve a device from a nearby monolith hospital, one used to heal their soldiers. Upon returning with the device, Strider suddenly attacks Skiff, forcing the doctor to kill him. The doctor then shares his interpretation of the zone. It isn't inherently evil, it's a phenomenon. The evil comes from the people who enter the zone with their greedy and shady motives. The doctor reveals his true identity. He is Dr. Kaimanov, the 8th scientist in the C consciousness program who refused to enter his tube at the last moment. His vision for the zone is different. While the zone may be destructive, he believes that if left to its own devices, it could become a creative force. Kaimanov then also reveals his thoughts on the subtle matter and the C consciousness representative we've encountered at Malachite. He dismisses it as unscientific and provides us with information about the project at Orbita, where the goal was to pierce the noosphere. The problem is the cartridge we need, which is in a lab in Cordon, but the entrance has been destroyed. Skiff then heads on to Cordon to speak with Sidorowicz. After following a few more leads, we meet a man named Dark, who possesses a decoder device. Together, they investigate the lab. Upon reaching a control room, a set of monitors activates, similar to those seen at the end of Clear Sky. Dark collapses and a man emerges from the shadows. It's S.T.A.L.K.E.R. It's revealed that Dark was an agent of the C consciousness, still working with his old programming. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. even shows us Dark's PDA with the message, "Kill S.T.A.L.K.E.R." S.T.A.L.K.E.R. then shares his view of the zone. He believes the zone is independent, a place that doesn't owe anything to anyone. This perspective has put him in conflict with all sides. Subtle matter, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. argues, isn't real either. It's just another illusion. The same applies to the Shining Zone, but S.T.A.L.K.E.R. wants Skiff to see it for himself. After some time, Skiff reaches an idyllic area, a house surrounded by flowers and greenery, peaceful and free of mutants or anomalies. But as Skiff pulls out the cartridge in the house, it transforms into a bleak, destroyed building. This is the illusion of the Shining Zone, an illusion that S.T.A.L.K.E.R. too once believed, but eventually overcame. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. then offers Skiff a choice. Support him in destroying the Stalker program, which means going against everyone else, or oppose him. There is no middle ground. Skiff's next stop is Orbita Station, where he uses the cartridge to enter a tube and experience what Kaimanov and the C consciousness representative were discussing. During this sequence, Skiff encounters Strider, or what remains of him, apparently in the noosphere, confirming that Strider is indeed dead. Depending on Skiff's past choices in the Circa conflict, Strider's reactions will be different. Regardless, Skiff soon meets S.T.A.L.K.E.R. again. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. once again gives him the choice to join them, but if Skiff does not accept, he will have to escape and fight his way out. As the story moves forward, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. informs Skiff that he's found a way to shut down the Stalker program. Skiff's next destination is the Troposphere, a Vard-controlled area. By flashing his Vard badge, Skiff can ask about Project Fiber, but this causes the entire base to turn hostile. Upon further investigation, Skiff uncovers information about Dark's death and realizes that Dark's vision was live-streamed to the control center, further confirming the Stalker program's existence. With this information, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. traces the center of the Stalker program to Pripyat, where Skiff must join him. On his way out, Skiff is confronted by Korshunov, leading to another major choice. Skiff can either join the Vard's cause for real or try to escape. If Skiff tries to escape, Korshunov will imprison him in the chemical plant, where he receives help from Dalin to break free. Skiff's next stop is Pripyat, but Dektariev, the protagonist of Call of Pripyat, now controls a core unit guarding the area and won't let anyone into the city. After some investigation, Skiff learns of a scanner that can disable anomalies temporarily. He can either give it to the core as a bargaining chip or use it to enter Pripyat. Skiff needs Dektariev's help to reach the underground, but all entrances are sealed. If allied with S.T.A.L.K.E.R., Dektariev provides Skiff with locations to investigate. If Skiff allies with S.P.A.R.K. or Vard, their men share their information. This underground location, known as the Foundation, is key, containing documents related to Operation Fairway, the failed military operation at the heart of Call of Pripyat. After reaching the underground, the game hits a point of no return. Skiff cannot go back to the zone. The only path forward is to finish the storyline. Depending on Skiff's choices, the next events vary. If allied with S.T.A.L.K.E.R. or S.P.A.R.K., Skiff, with Dalin's help, takes control of a control room. If it's S.T.A.L.K.E.R., Skiff is accompanied by Dektariev, while if it's S.P.A.R.K., Richter is present. Dalin betrays Korshunov, and Skiff must take him down. If allied with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Skiff fights Korshunov and Richter dies. If allied with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Skiff and Dektariev defeat Korshunov. Dalin then uses the cartridge to communicate with his father, a sea consciousness scientist. Asking his father a question only he could answer. If allied with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, the representative doesn't answer, and Dalin destroys the mechanism, triggering a massive explosion. If Skiff allies with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, the representative answers, affirming that the Shining Zone and subtle matter are real. Skiff then receives further orders from S.T.A.L.K.E.R. If you're allied with the Ward, Korshunov enters the pod. Skiff must defend the control room from S.T.A.L.K.E.R forces, culminating in a boss fight with Richter. After the fight, Skiff executes Dalin for betraying S.T.A.L.K.E.R and the Ward. Agatha then appears with Herman, who was too valuable to be killed. It was only a test for Skiff, and his choice back at S.T.A.L.K.E.R did not matter. All factions agree that the next step is to reach the generators and enter Kaimanov's pod. Whoever enters the pod becomes an intermediary between the zone and the noosphere. For S.T.A.L.K.E.'s ending, S.T.A.L.K.E.R steps into the pod. If Skiff didn't side with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, he must fight S.T.A.L.K.E.R. If Skiff kills S.T.A.L.K.E.R, he finds the Heart of Chornobyl artifact. If Skiff sides with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, no fight occurs and Skiff continues on. Moving on, Skiff has another encounter with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, this time at the monolith brainwashing room from Clear Sky. If allied with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, further exposition occurs. If not, Skiff must fight S.T.A.L.K.E.R. After battling monolith forces and the Granite Squad, Skiff reaches the pod. If you're allied with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, S.T.A.L.K.E.R enters the pod, and we get his ending. S.T.A.L.K.E.R becomes the mediator. As Skiff exits the area, monolith forces allow him to pass, but they are also ordered to kill anyone trying to enter or leave the zone, implying that Skiff is now trapped in the zone as well. The zone will remain as it is, without outside interference. During the S.T.A.L.K.E.R ending, S.T.A.L.K.E.R enters the pod. After exiting, Skiff finds himself in a field of flowers. The Shining Zone has come true. Skiff sits by a campfire with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Richter, and other S.T.A.L.K.E.R members, relaxing. Humanity is immortal, and all evil has been vanquished. But as the camera pans, we see Skiff talking to himself. It was all an illusion. The Shining Zone was never real. If Skiff sided with the Ward, Korshunov enters the pod. Agatha offers Skiff a new home, or the chance to stay with the program as a colonel, overseeing the Ward's progress. The zone is destroyed, and all sea projects fall under Ward control. The final scene shows Skiff's vision on a monitor, mirroring Dark's fate, heavily implying that Skiff has become a brainwashed agent. Hundreds of screens surround him, suggesting he's not the only one. However, there is another alternative ending. During the S.T.A.L.K.E.R arc, S.T.A.L.K.E.R asks Skiff to kill Kaimanov, the doctor. If Skiff complies, then he's locked into the S.T.A.L.K.E.R ending. If Skiff refuses, an emission engulfs Kaimanov's house. Kaimanov remains outside, refusing shelter. Skiff discovers an additional cartridge in Kaimanov's house, experiencing the events of 2006 from Kaimanov's perspective. Skiff sees Kaimanov shooting at the pods, triggering the creation of the zone. Flashbacks reveal Kaimanov's meetings with S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Skiff proceeds to the generator, taking down both S.T.A.L.K.E.R and S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Skiff then enters the pod, allowing the zone to choose its own fate. The result is a worldwide expansion of the zone, creating new zones around the globe. Meanwhile, Kaimanov is revealed to be still alive. He was Faust all along, who made a switch and assumed the Doctor's identity. The timing of the switch remains unclear. Although it is indicative that the Doctor killed Strider, so maybe that switch already happened during that timeline. The storyline preserves the bittersweet nature of Stalker endings, where happiness is fleeting and elusive. The Doctor's ending, the most tragic, forces a morally ambiguous choice, highlighting the complex relationship between the long-established characters and the larger conflict. Having the player kill or spare a beloved character who always seemed to be a positive influence in the zone. In the end, these are classical Stalker endings, and they pose more questions than they answer, which is always a great thing about endings in Stalker games for me personally. Now that the story is out of the way, it's time to address the big question: is this the sequel we hoped for? To be blunt, my answer is still yes, but there are definitely several things I'd hoped for that didn't make it into Stalker 2. Let me get this out of the way first. I suspect the game had to be released when it was, likely due to pressure from fans and possibly some development or publishing challenges that were not privy to. In any case, I believe this game could have been much better if it had released a year later, and as a hardcore Stalker fan, it would have been fine by me. Ultimately, your opinion on the game depends on your expectations. For longtime Stalker fans, especially those who spent years with mods, the game feels like it's caught between the ambitious modding community and the reality of a big budget release. Mods have been adding new features and expanding the Stalker experience for 15 years, and I was hoping that devs would have taken inspiration from that. If you look at Stalker 2 from this angle and couple it with my wish for a return to the form of Shadow of Chernobyl, then Stalker 2 may feel like a bit of a letdown. Shadow of Chernobyl, despite its troubled development, was an ambitious project that felt incomplete. I had hoped that Stalker 2 would be a return to that level of ambition and offer a redemption of sorts. Instead, Stalker 2 is a bigger game, more in line with Call of Pripyat, with more of a focus on presenting the story and bringing it up to modern industry standards. Don't get me wrong, I love Call of Pripyat, but Clear Sky and Call of Pripyat always felt like episodes in the Stalker universe. Shadow and Chernobyl, and in my hopes Stalker 2, were supposed to be universe-defining titles, grand, full-fledged experiences. However, my two biggest fears for Stalker 2 didn't come to fruition. The game didn't turn into a flavorful corridor shooter like Metro, the dreaded Metroization of Stalker never happened. The core Stalker experience remains intact. Also, while there are moments where you can feel the influence of political trends in gaming, I still believe the zone in Stalker 2 feels true to its roots, grounded, and believable. If I were to judge the game solely based on its current state, I'd recommend it to any hardcore Stalker fan. You're likely immune to the jank that comes with a game still ironing out its bugs. But if you're a newcomer to the series, I'd still recommend starting with Shadow of Chernobyl and moving through Call of Pripyat, at least until Stalker 2 is fully patched and refined. I'm confident Stalker 2 will get its cyberpunk-like treatment, becoming a vastly more polished and enjoyable experience in a year or two. At that point, it will be a great entry point for anyone wanting to experience Stalker. Personally, even in its broken state, I've had a lot of fun with Stalker 2. I have enjoyed it for what it is, and many of the quirks and issues I had with the older titles are back as well. The on-rails, corridor shooter-like endgame is a prime example of GSC staying true to their roots, in all the good and bad ways. But as I said earlier, I'm not worried about the future of Stalker 2, because of the mod support already available. For me, the vanilla experience is just the beginning. It's a prequel to the real fun, which is the freedom that modders will have to shape the game. As long as Stalker 2 gives modders the canvas to create their own vision of the zone, I'm happy. And I'm confident that we'll spend more time in this new, improved zone than we ever did in the old one, even though we loved it and still love it now. So, modders rejoice. Vanilla enthusiasts, you're in for a treat too. Stalker 2 is a good game with a flawed release, and maybe the most skilled thing GSC pulled off is creating a game that offers something to hardcore fans and newcomers alike. As always, I'll see you guys next time, most likely in the Bloody West.